Kia ora, everyone. This is the first in a series of interviews with CEOs and leaders of our RDAs around the country. They're going to share the woes, the wows, the challenges, and the recovery plans for each of their respective regions. And the first of those interviews is with EDA leader at Toy EDA, and that's Karl Graddon, GM of Strategy. He is invested in the Eastern Bay of Plenty through the Toy EDA, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be the guinea pig today.
Indeed. I'm sure we'll both get better at it. Or at least hopefully I will. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions to pose to you, and please feel free to meander as you will, but I just thought it might help if we had a couple of structured questions. And the first one is just to give some an overview to the listeners. What is the structure of your economy, its specializations, its challenges pre-COVID-19? What did it look like?
So pre-COVID, we'd reset our strategy for Toy EDA 12 months before. It was actually when I joined the organisation together with my co-general manager, Ian Morton, who looks after the operations side of it while I look towards the strategy side. And we really set out with a new vision, which is very, very simple, to create a better future for the next generation in the Eastern Bay of Plenty. Very simple. And we decided that as part of our strategic refresh, we got all of our trustees together and we looked at only three things, really. The first was creating a winning brand for our region. So how do we change the narrative of one today where a lot of the times the Eastern Bay of Plenty hits the headlines? It's often for the wrong reasons. It's often to do with crime or other socially negative statistics and things. So we want to change the narrative within the Eastern Bay for one of hope. Create a winning brand for people to want to move here, to live here, to stay here and invest here. And of course, visit and hopefully bring their putia with them as well. On that note, we obviously, in the last 12 months, we've also had the significant challenge around whakaari and the eruption. So we've been dealing with that as well. I'll touch on that because basically the whakaari recovery was actually being closed down in terms of a team effort at the same time that we went into lockdown. So we just basically were able to transition our team across. Touch on that later. So that's the first thing. Is the first pillar is the change the narrative and create a winning brand for our region. Then the second thing is it was largely focused on how do we maximise the impact of the Provincial Growth Fund and the ability for a surge region like ours. Unfortunately, we have some of the worst statistics in the country, if not the worst statistics for some of the social demographic stats we have. And, you know, we've been very fortunate. We were looking to attract $100 million of provincial growth funding, and to date we've had announced 207 and counting. So over the last 12 months, we've actually done a pretty good job, and we did it very differently, Susan. We took, instead of an almost ad hoc approach, we went right back to basics and defined what we wanted to be, how we were going to come together. We created the Regional Growth Leadership Group, which was a cohesive group of every iwi leader and chair, and we're so rich in our Māori economy here that that leadership was absolutely fundamental for us. So and they formed. Sorry,
this was in response to COVID-19.
No, this was pre-COVID. This was in response to the opportunity that we had with the Provincial Growth Fund.
Right.
And so we came together as a region to really define how we could collaborate and what the priorities were to be. And we only focused on four things. We worked out the maximum number of jobs, and we had the ambition to create 7,000 jobs across the Eastern Bay, across four sectors, both direct and indirect, but it's aquaculture, which is largely supporting whakatohea. We have high-value horticulture, so we make a lot of maize on Māori land here, which is probably the lowest performing crop you can have on land. It's very rich, fertile land. but the Provincial Growth Fund became the catalyst to create value-added crops. So high-value horticulture was a key one. That was largely working with Te Whanapanui and some of the Ngāti Awa territory as well. And then we had in Kawerau the opportunity to create the Kawerau Putuaki Industrial Development, which was largely an inland port that takes advantage of the fact we've got some of the best geothermal resources in the country. And we've got 2 of the 3 largest boat builders, believe it or not, in the Whakatane district. And we've created a cluster in the Whakatane district around marine and tourism. Now, the tourism obviously was underpinned largely by our iconic destination or attraction, which is Whakaari, obviously on hold right now. So we've focused all of the efforts across the region at a collective level agreed by the iwi chairs and CEs, as well as the civic leaders of the mayors and CEs of our 4 councils, that those are the 4 priorities. That was the first thing we did. And then we've obviously got our constraints to achieving the growth we want, and that was the 3rd pillar of our strategy, and that was around workforce development, housing, quality and quantity, and connectivity, whether it be through digital connectivity, infrastructure like roading, or public transport. How do we take the Eastern Bay to the world, and how do we bring the Eastern Bay to the world? Bring the world to the Eastern Bay. So those are the three pillars that we had in our strategy, and we're very conscious that we wouldn't have been successful if we weren't actually able to have everyone on the same page. So that was the first thing for us. And those challenges around workforce, we have some of the worst stats, getting everyone in terms of employment. So that was probably our biggest one, and that led to significant deprivation indices across our region. Now, as we look to COVID and what we did there, it's quite interesting. Our economy of $1.9 billion is largely primary sector based. The kiwi fruit sector here was booming, remains a great growth opportunity for us as a region. The forestry, obviously significant challenges there, significant challenges around how that's going to be long-term. The long-term recovery is going to be a significant challenge for us in terms of workforce. But we do have the advantage of having some significant mills, both in Whakatane and in Kawerau, that are able to move the lumber up the value chain, unlike other areas that don't have the processing assets on the ground in the region. And the dairy industry kept on ticking along. We're lucky to have one of Fonterra's best factories here in Edgecombe in terms of value add, and we also have a significant amount of investment into this area through a local company called Waiu. It's a Māori-owned dairy processing factory into value-add ingredients. So really, our economies kept on trucking in many, many ways, and we were fortunate that on day one, because we already had our recovery efforts, Susan, aligned for Whakaari. We've been working extremely closely with Whakatane District Council, the Chamber of Commerce, and Toi EDA. We just formed a team.
Yes.
We had one voice, one team. It was a COVID response team, and we changed our signatures to make it that symbolic. And we really leveraged the fact that the only thing that really mattered for all of us were the outcomes we were trying to achieve. So our organisations merged, and we brought in people from volunteers from the Kawerau district, and we brought in people from the Oporiki district to assist us. So it's morphed, it's evolved, it's been a huge collective effort, and I think that's probably going to be the most compelling thing for us going forwards, is we've changed the ways of working, because we don't see the same silos as we saw before COVID. So we've actually had quite a significant uplift in collaboration across the region as a result of COVID. It hasn't all been bad from a kaupapa perspective. Obviously, from an economic perspective, there's been significant impact. But the primary focus, as well as the recovery efforts, have largely softened it for us.
So having that architecture in place is a huge advantage for you in going into COVID-19, because you can just transfer the focus.
Yeah.
Your strategy, did you need to revisit that, or were you confident that that stood no matter what?
So we revisited it with our trustees as well as with a lot of our partners in EDA representation. We did accelerate some things. We realised that the digital connectivity, for example, is really important. We have some of the most remote places in the country are located within our rohi. Te Urewera, for example, up the end of the East Cape, or Kōkiri, places like that. These are very isolated communities, and we found that those communities in general went backwards a long way because they didn't have access to digital connectivity that allowed them to continue schooling or their business activity. So we've reprioritised that. We've bumped it up the list. Yeah. We pivoted our workforce development activities. So instead of spending a lot more time on the long-term outcomes that we're trying to achieve with cadetships and apprenticeships, we pivoted a lot of that, or helped people pivot their funding to much shorter-term outcomes. So our driver operator training centre, which Toi EDA operates, worked with the providers to try and find a way to tailor those more to the people which are coming out of the workforce as well, to redeploy them as fast as possible. So I'd suggest that, yes, we revisited our strategy, reprioritised, but the most important thing was actually how we went about working with our partners to make sure that overlaps and underlaps of activity were identified. So we have 4 councils that fund us: the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, we have the Whakatane Council, District Council, Kawerau District Council, and the Poriki District Council. Each of them had their activity plans for their recoveries. They were slightly different. The Chamber of Commerce had their own activity streams. Each of the iwi partners had activity streams underway as well about their own recovery plans. So we took the leadership role in not telling people what to do, but mapping out the activities across the entire Eastern Bay and saying, there's a gap here, guys. Who's going to fill this void? Or did you know that there's a complementary work stream over here? How do we get 1 + 1 is greater than 2? If you're both wanting to do this. So that's probably how we changed our plan, but it wasn't a revolution. It was simply a realignment of our organisational skills, capability, and making sure that everyone understood who's who in the zoo, the sandpit.
There seems to be a lot going on in your region. You've got the Poriki Harbour redevelopment. Yeah. You've got Catalyst Karl, very active. Is that was that pre-COVID work coming to fruition through the PGF? Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of the fact that I believe that the Eastern Bay of Plenty will slingshot out of this potentially faster than other regions. Why? Because we've actually spent the last 1.5 years building those 4 catalytic projects that I mentioned: the aquaculture, high value horticulture, the Kawerau inland port, and the Whakatane marine and tourism sector. So we've actually got those plans in play already, and there's a lot going on. Those are all to deliver 7,000 direct and indirect jobs, and in a population of just around 50,000 people, that's a lot of jobs. We unfortunately have a lot of unemployment. So, these have been in play for quite some time. As we refocused our strategy, we really tried to hone our resources as closely as possible around that. Yeah.
Have you been able to measure clearly you had numbers for unemployment pre-COVID. Yeah. How have you been able to, or have you been able to measure the impact of COVID-19 on your community, the economic impact? Because I know, talking to many members from around the country, that real-time intelligence has been a real challenge for them.
So the answer is, do we have a metric? No. we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I guess that's one of the challenges for us is translating anecdotal evidence into fact, because funding often gets attracted only to fact rather than anecdote, right? But we have been quite fortunate that our credit card spend in our region has actually been very robust. Why is that? Well, actually, because of the largest contributor to GDP in our region today is actually social services. They kept on trucking, as well as a lot of the social services actually had an increase in funding. So people which are hand to mouth often spend everything that comes in, unfortunately. So that's one thing. Do we have sectors that are really hurting? Yes, like our tourism sector already really hurting. There was $1.9 million spent to support businesses across the Eastern Bay that were impacted by whakaari. The objective of that was to make sure that they were able to survive until the next summer season and to begin to pivot to the more domestic market. So those activities were already underway, acknowledging that the Eastern Bay is not so much of a domestic destination during winter. So we follow those credit card stats as much as anything, visitor numbers, but do we have much more than the unemployment stats being tracked? At the moment, no. So unemployment and spend are the two metrics we're actually looking at. Mm. And unemployment, to be fair, Susan, we're actually not as bad as many people because primary sector, kiwi fruit, forestry, replanting, it's all going gangbusters for us here. This is the place to be. If anyone wants to move, they should be moving to the Eastern Bay.
I would expect nothing less from you as a great champion for your region, Karl. So the impact of COVID, it sounds to me like the PGF almost, or your preparations and your response to PGF almost set you up.
Yes.
And prepared you reasonably well to deal with COVID-19, along with your strategy and all your local efforts at collaboration. What I hear from around the regions is the stresses and strains that this has placed on the EDA, because the workload prior to PGF was huge. The PGF took it into another dimension, and now COVID-19 on the top of that. So I'm interested in hearing from you a little bit about how your organisation has weathered COVID-19, both the initial response and your plans for recovery.
So let's just say that the largest funders to our organisation, Whakatane District Council, Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Oporiki and Kaora, have been very, very supportive. Very supportive. It's been great. We, as a team, took a voluntary pay cut at the management level to maximise the funding. We went out of our way, I guess. So my role's funded for a day and a half a week, as is my co-general manager. We've been supported, thankfully, to continue down that path. We have not secured additional funding for the implementation. We see this next phase of the Provincial Growth Fund is actually the highest risk, but there's not currently any support from central government for us to support the execution phase. There was to
capacity in terms of human resources.
Human resources, in any way, shape, or form. We received zero funding from the central government today to support any COVID response.
Yeah.
Nothing. We see that as a risk to our region, that there's no one over the top of that. And we are having active conversations with MB about that right now, because we would hate for us to miss this once in a lifetime opportunity of the Provincial Growth Fund by not achieving what we set out to achieve just because of COVID. This is a game changer for our region. The Oporiki Harbour has been in play for almost 20 years in terms of planning. So, for us to drop the ball now, it probably isn't something we want to do. And we see that as significant risk. It's had significant impact on my team's bandwidth. If they were working 12, 15-hour days minimum during the lockdown, and it was all done on work capped hours, so done volunteer basis basically in the end. So I'm exceptionally proud of them. They stood up when we needed to stand up. When the CIP was needing to be submitted, there were people that worked through the night. So, we're very, very fortunate to have the commitment of the individuals in our team to allow us to do that. Yeah. We'd love to see some further support from central government to make sure that these things don't fall over.
Look, and I think that's the refrain from around the country. I'm not sure that people are quite in the position you're at, where you're having to give volunteer, hours over and over again, day after day after day. But I know that most of the EDAs are stretched. They were with the PGF. They're even more so now as a result of COVID-19. So it's something that is a common refrain, and that I think there is a role for EDANs there in advocating for that as well. Did you find during the COVID-19 that your leadership style changed at all? As in, there's the initial response, which is, what do we do to keep these businesses alive? For people that are facing liquidation and so on, and then there's the recovery stage, and you're dealing with a team that hasn't faced this before, who have been used to working not in a buoyant economy but in a known economy that changes dramatically. Did you find that you needed to adjust your style? Or I suspect that you may not have had to, but I just wondered.
I don't think so. Both Ian and I, our styles are intuitively to I guess more boundary spanning, so we're much more inclusive than some other parties. And at the end of the day, the Economic Development Agency often isn't the party that does anything. It makes sure that people are connected that do things, and making sure that the symbiotic relationships that can be formed are formed. At least that's how it works in the Eastern Bay here. And we're a very, very small and lean team. Now, what we did find was that because we were actually standing up and delivering, it attracted people to us. It attracted some really key talent that was really key talent that was otherwise slipping through the cracks or not engaged, and they've stayed engaged. People are now volunteering their time to continue to support us. I actually just walked out of a meeting from one of the supporters we have, where they've now given a whole day per week to support us. They can't give us funding, but they will give us a person per week. And it's wonderful. So I guess that collaborative style has endured, and I'm hoping that we'll continue to deliver the results that builds the confidence in our region.
One final question, if I could please, Karl. So your focus over the next 12 to 18 months, do you see that as being on the pillars of your strategy, gaining PGF support, capacity? Where are you going with that?
So we'll continue to work side by side with our partners. We will continue to accelerate our program around the thriving communities pieces of housing. It's all very well creating these jobs. People got to live somewhere. They've got to be trained. The pipeline's got to be there. We're taking advantage of Rove, obviously, to make sure that the local skills are really deployed for locals, with the training opportunities here locally. And the digital connectivity, once again, that's been brought forward and accelerated. So, I think that ultimately the focus for us is no longer on making sure the money is going to be spent in our region for these catalytic projects. It's no longer on the attraction. It's making sure that that's spent well and managed well, and that there's a workforce that is able to be deployed and assets that are able to be deployed in a cohesive way. So if you can imagine the amount of concrete that needs to be laid, or the amount of aggregate that needs to be used. If we get out of sync on these things, there won't be we could easily come a cropper on all of the projects if we don't have that macro view of all of the activities that are going on. So we're into implementation phase now. We held a hui just 2 weeks ago. We saved about 70 jobs as a result of doing this in the construction sector, because we tried to say, this is all the activity that's coming in the future. These are the contracts that are available now. Contractors, you're announcing redundancies right now. If we accelerated these contracts, how can we get you to stop those redundancies? So those sorts of activities now, I think, are going to be much more, those transparent activities are going to be much more important for us going forwards. And it's going to be, the last piece is making sure that we create that narrative, the winning narrative for our region, our rohi, for people to come home. All these people that are so skilled, that have left, the talent that's left, we need them to want to come home and stay and make their life here. This is a moment in time where people are now reframing their own lives, and how do we capture the imagination of people that want to come back and live in New Zealand, or move back to be with whānau here in the Eastern Bay, because I'll say it again, there's nowhere better. I can't imagine a better place to live with more opportunities on the table than we have in the next 3 years here in this region.
Well, I have family in your region and I visit them, so I can't help but agree. Look, thank you, Karl. I can see that you're making a real difference, which is what we're all about. Every one of us is about making a difference. We were speaking earlier about how people often come to economic development at a later time in their life, and they're usually motivated to make a difference to their community. They have that strong sense of social justice and public good, and I can see it's alive and kicking in your region. And I think your community is lucky to have you. So thank you for your time today. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.